Liam Neeson recently told a reporter,
As I said before, I've got full-blown AIDS.
Right.
Do you want to know how I got it?
Sure.
I'm a well-known homosexual actor.
Wow.
"Whoa, wait, no, not that, the other thing." He said, "There's so many spin-offs of Star Wars. It's diluting it to me, and it's taken away the mystery and the magic in a weird way." Now, I've been saying this for years, but I don't think Neeson really knew how right he was. I always knew it instinctively, but it made me do a little back-of-the-envelope math. To the best of my admittedly terrible math skills, as of the creation of this video in early March 2023, there has been approximately 9,500 total minutes of Star Wars content across all movies and TV, which includes live action, animated, and cartoons. All of it. Here's the thing. The original trilogy's complete runtime is only 377 minutes total. Star Wars, Empire, and Return of the Jedi now make up less than 4% of the totality that is Star Wars on film. And that's just awful to me. And it may be crazy to say, but it's why I really miss Star Wars. With Neeson's statement and the third season of The Mandalorian just starting, I found myself thinking a lot about Star Wars lately. Now, keep in mind, I was never one of those Star Wars nerds that wanted to hang out at conventions or pored over the extended universe novels. It's nothing against any of those fans, or the novels for that matter, it just was never my thing. But I was part of that first generation of kids that fell in love with it thanks to me being 7 when it was released. My older sister, who was 10 years older than me and who I absolutely worshipped, brought me to see Star Wars in June of '77. Now, I know it was June because my dad and his girlfriend were there too, but they went to see the Nick Nolte, Jacqueline Bisset movie The Deep instead. I remember seeing the poster for it next to the one for Star Wars near the box office. I kind of see the appeal from my dad at that time, so well done, Dad. So that meant Star Wars had been out for about a month at that point, and yet it was absolutely packed and still in the largest theater at Lakeside Mall in Metairie, Louisiana, which is just outside of New Orleans. I can still remember that old 20th Century Fox logo and drum cadence and then trumpet fanfare. And then in total silence, blue text which read, "A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away." Then that Star Wars logo and the John Williams theme. And as the scrolls started, my sister kind of instinctively leaned over and began to whisper to me what was passing by too quickly for me to catch being that young, which is just one of those sweetly tender things that stick with you your whole life. Then the feeling of that first ship cruising overhead for what seemed like forever. Then Darth Vader's entrance and everything that followed. It was absolute magic, all of it. I just remember being completely enthralled. I left the theater beaming and acting out scenes in the parking lot. That Christmas, my sister gave me Luke's X-Wing fighter, the one where the wings would open when you'd press R2-D2's head down, and had a little red tip on the nose that would light up, which kind of always bothered me since that's not how the damn thing fired shots in the movie. But I loved it, and I loved Star Wars. But I was 7, so as much as I loved it, I loved other things too. I was playing sports and hanging out with friends and watching other movies and TV shows and cartoons. I had no expectations of there being a sequel, and I'm sure I was thrilled to learn about Empire and still remember being shocked in the theater to hear Vader tell Luke he was his father. And by 1983, when the story seemed to wrap up with Return of the Jedi, I was a contented 13-year-old that had seen the greatest trilogy of all time, and I put that story to bed. It was special because it was limited to those 3 movies for me. Barely 6 hours of magic on film that I knew I'd have forever. The scarcity of it was what gave it value. And that was fine because I grew up at a time when we were awash with news stories and franchises popping up left and right. I was happy to keep Star Wars in its own special box while I moved on to Ghostbusters, or Indiana Jones, or Goonies, or Terminator, or Aliens, or Predator. It was understood that these were limited stories like books. There was a beginning and an end. The audience was brought in at a certain point and would be shown the door later. There was no expectation of a forever story that would go all the way back to the assumed beginning, filling in every conceivable nook and cranny, all the way to the potential end doing the very same. It wouldn't have dawned on me. It's not that, at least at that time, I was opposed to that. It's that the very concept was unheard of. There was no reason to think we'd ever get any more Star Wars, which was fine. So in 1999, when George Lucas announced The Phantom Menace, I got caught up like everyone else and can remember downloading the trailer over dial-up and waiting forever to get a glimpse of new Star Wars. Even though I was 29 by that point, I wanted to love it. While sitting there in the theater, I remember thinking, it sort of looks like Star Wars, kind of. It had many of the same parts, same terminology, but it was off. It was wrong. It looked familiar and strange, if that makes sense. Maybe it was all the unnecessary CGI or the set design, which at times didn't match the 70s sci-fi feel of the originals. Or maybe it was the fact that so much of the story stepped on previously established canon. I still get angry thinking about midichlorians. Like a lot of people, I was left feeling disappointed, but being unwilling to really accept that for a while. It's not that there weren't bright spots that were fun to look at or interesting. It's just, as a whole, I realized it didn't add anything I needed or wanted, and mostly it just ruined things from the past. That same cycle happened twice more with Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Some great individual things, but mostly unnecessary, and things which ruined past events for me. And by the end, we'd now doubled the total Star Wars films, and had made the overall franchise worse, in my opinion, for having done so. Star Wars, the original trilogy that had been the whole story, had now just become a section of timeline. It was made lesser. And now, thanks to all the product that I mentioned earlier, it's almost inconsequential. And even then, my past love for Star Wars blinded me, and I was still open for more. Given how much I eventually grew to hate the prequel trilogy, I was happy to see Disney buy Star Wars from Lucas in 2012. He had taken what he thought was his exclusive toys and messed with them, forever altering the gift he'd given fans with those first movies. At that point, Disney was killing it with their superhero movies in the MCU, and they looked like they could do no wrong. I remember thinking, how bad could Disney fuck up Star Wars? Yeah, I've made worse predictions in my life, but not a whole hell of a lot of them. J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens was mostly just a retread of Star Wars. And by the way, I'm never saying A New Hope or Episode 4, so stop holding your breath. The name of the first movie is Star Wars. So parts of it at least felt better than the prequels, but it's hard not to see the entire plot of the original Star Wars running alongside. In addition, it was riddled with over-the-top girl boss moments thanks to Rey Sue. Not to mention the unforgettable crime of killing Han Solo, something I never, ever wanted to see as a fan. The original trio had saved the galaxy and waved goodbye at the end of Return of the Jedi. Their story was over. This idea of bringing back past heroes just to kill them on screen has got to end, and you better believe I'll address this in a follow-up video. There's something to be said for simply, and they lived happily ever after. Oh, and for the record, I don't give a shit if it's what Harrison Ford wanted in order to come back. Not to be outdone, Rian Johnson did the unthinkable and neutered one of the greatest heroes in all modern fiction by making Luke Skywalker a depressed, disloyal, forsaken hermit that had attempted to murder his own nephew. Luke's character assassination in The Last Jedi was a giant fuck you to not only longtime Star Wars fans that grew up idolizing Luke, but a poorly veiled attempt at killing the past to elevate Disney's new crop of heroes. Keep in mind, Disney paid this fucking asshole to destroy their character like this because he sold them on the idea of subverting expectations. And when fans dared complain, they were told they were the problem. Eat an entire bag of dicks, Ryan. And I can't tell you a damn thing about the specifics of The Rise of Skywalker or Solo, because at that point I was officially out and refused to watch any of it. I was done. I walked away after nearly a lifetime of loving Star Wars because they'd abused me as a fan. They'd taken my loyalty for granted and had dared suggest I was the issue when I pointed out how they'd ruined what they'd bought. Oh, I did watch the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian and thought it was okay, but bailed for good when Disney fired Gina Carano for her Twitter activities, but kept this ass clown around. It took way too long, but eventually Disney taught me the lesson I'd failed to learn back when Lucas had created the prequels, which was that the original trilogy was and would always be the entire Star Wars universe for me, regardless of whatever they produced afterwards. I guess it's like being lonely in a crowded city or in a room full of people, but I think it's this glut of Star Wars product which has made me miss Star Wars so much. For Disney, this is all just an effort to mine the extended universe in an attempt to never have to create anything new, which seems to be their company's entire blueprint at this point. To me, this is the height of irony, considering we're talking about a franchise that itself was once the new thing that created, almost out of thin air, an entire genre. Imagine if back in the early 70s, George Lucas, instead of writing Star Wars, had been tasked with reimagining Flash Gordon. Or if he and Steven Spielberg had decided to reboot Alan Quatermain rather than create Indiana Jones. Or if Ridley Scott and James Cameron had decided to play around with some of the 1950s sci-fi movies rather than bringing us Alien and Terminator respectively. We'd have all been worse off, and our collective mythology would have been that much less interesting and magical today. Are modern creatives so devoid of talent that they're unable to come up with new stories and heroes and villains? Is it just that studios refuse to give them the backing to do it? Does it really even matter? Because in the end, the result's the same. Instead of new, unique stories, we get continually warmed over old IPs, and I just have no patience for this anymore. So, what do you think? Is this just a case of old guys screaming at the clouds, or do you think there's a reason for hope in Disney continuing to produce more and more Star Wars content? Hell, do you actually like what they've produced so far? Will it get better after Kathleen Kennedy has finally shown the door as many hope? Or are you like me and think that what made Star Wars magical was the scarcity of it all? And would you prefer Star Wars be left alone the way it had been for nearly 2 decades before the prequels? I'd actually be curious to know your thoughts, so feel free to let me know in the comments section. Or don't. I'm not the boss of you.